in my opinion. I feel like that's a lot, but like that's also most stories are have been already been told. It's just because it's so bare bones, you don't get a lot more of the color that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Right. There's no flavor to kind of hide the fact that you're eating boiled chicken again. You didn't put any salt and rosemary on there.
But it comes along with some a really great service by the waiter, and and like they have a really great live band in the restaurant.
Uh, Hi, I'm John, and I'm a gamer.
Hi, John.
Gaming has come a long way over the last several decades. The debate on whether the medium is art has largely ended with a very conclusive yes, and around the world we're finally seeing people treat it with more of the respect that it deserves. With that in mind, and because I'm just as much of a game talker as I am a game player, I went around to all my gamer buddies to enlist their help in discussing games as art. So, if you love gaming as much as I do, then join us. Trust me, you're among friends. Listen in as we discuss the themes, gameplay, and whatever else comes to mind. It's like a book club, but gaming. Today's topic?
Bastion. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Book Club of Gaming podcast. I'm your host, John. With me today are Adrien
Hello.
and Sami.
Hi.
It's so good to be doing this again. We haven't recorded in a few months just due to just several different things going on, life in general. I got COVID and then I got lazy. But we're back. I've been playing a lot of games in the meantime, so hopefully this will be the start of many more recordings to come. How are you guys feeling today?
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Good. Yeah. So today we're talking about Bastion, which is like a huge indie classic hit. It kind of resurged if not redefined the isometric like brawler style of video game. But I had never played it. I had played Transistor. I don't know if you guys ever played that one.
No, that
I
was the
haven't
next
played that
game
one.
that's made after Bastion, right?
Right. And then they did Hades, which I have not played.
I've heard really good things about Hades. I need to play that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so I played Transistor and I think that it was a slightly like improved upon like the way the isometric battling works. I'm hoping that Hades is like they figured it out like completely and they just went all out because that's what I hear is that Hades is just like a fully realized game.
Yeah. Definitely. It's I mean, they've really been working on this formula for a while. And yeah, I mean, Bastion really started out this, it didn't just start out this like genre of like isometric brawler revival, but also like the game was hugely influential on the budding indie game scene at the time.
Oh yeah, it was huge for indie games because it was like the first time, one of the first times I think, at least, that we really had a game from the indie space that like had the audio quality and the like artistic, flair of Bastion. And this, and
Mhm.
we'll definitely want to talk about the music later. But man, that music and the narrator.
Yeah, I do think that the sound design in Bastion is where it shines the most personally. Like
Mhm.
I really enjoy some of the art and I really, the gameplay once I got used to it could be fun at times. Other times I still like even towards the end of the game I was just getting kind of frustrated
Mhm.
with certain aspects of it. That also might be the loadouts that I was preferring. Uh but the sound design and the narrator always kept me wanting to seek out more and keep pushing forward and finish the story.
Mhm.
What was Adrian? You told me the name of the narrator, the guy who plays the narrator
Oh,
once,
I'll have to look it up. Hang on.
but he's done some other stuff since then, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was this like his
Logan
his
Cunningham.
start? What was it?
Logan Cunningham.
Logan Cunningham. And was this like his breakout like role or
This was his first video game role, at
Yeah.
least.
so yeah. Yeah, this game definitely started a lot of things for a lot of people, which is really cool.
Yeah, and this
Um
was also the first game that really launched Supergiant into being an indie darling. And um, yeah, I mean, they did some pretty. it just has so much influence on the indie game space these days that it's difficult to understate it.
I mean, I think the other one of the, I know this is maybe like going off of like a bit of a tangent, but it came to mind, is the way that that narrator interacts with what you're doing in the game is just very impressive, especially for the time.
Yes.
Right, because you have the more scripted things where it's like, yeah, he's going to say this line when you get to this part of the level. Then there's also I mean, they're scripted obviously, but he's going to say this thing if you try to do this thing. Like if you fall off the edge, he's going to comment on it. Whereas if you're an experienced player, there's a potential for you to go the entire game without falling off the edge. You might never hear him like throw some shade. Like,
yeah, the decision to make all of the audio so context sensitive, I can't really think of a game before that actually, you know, had so much audio that really interacted with what the player was doing. I know, yeah, I know when I was a game design student, people talked about doing this. There were some, you know, there are some publications about this kind of context sensitive stuff, and it had been done a little bit with music, where, you know, you would do like hybrid mixing where you'd like mix in certain elements based on what was going on, but nobody had actually tried to do it with like a narrator or something. You know, before then it was just like a lot of games are set up of like, oh, there's map triggers, lines will play when you get to a certain point, but nothing like, you know, that really felt so immersive of that the narrator is actually telling your story.
Right, and actually commenting on what it was that you were doing.
Yeah.
It's sort of a precursor to games like the one that really jumps to my mind, and maybe yours too, the Stanley Parable.
Right. Stanley Parable, I believe, actually preceded this.
Really?
The original mod did, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's now a full game. So, yeah, because I actually played the Stanley Parable back when it was just a mod, and have not played the full game, but at least in the mod, I think it didn't take it to the same degree that Bastion did. I think that's where, you know, the full game might, and I think probably does, because it came out much more recently. But the mod did not do the contextual stuff to quite the same degree, or it didn't feel as fluid.
Yeah, I original mod was still very like the game was constructed in a way where it was all about traversal, so that they could use those like location based triggers in order to get something that was kind of similar where the narrator was commenting on what you were doing, but definitely not to the same extent.
Right, not as much action based.
Exactly.
Like you still have a point A and a point B, although I mean Bastion does have a couple of different endings, but that's all like relegated pretty much towards the end of the game, your decision to save or not save Zolf.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that's a good question to start with. Did you guys save or not save Zolf?
I did.
I've actually done both endings.
Oh, okay. But your first time through, which one did you do?
I think I saved Zolf.
I did not. I did not like that guy. I took him to the Bastion, and he fucked me over, and I was but I did watch a playthrough of the other way through, and I kind of regret not doing it now.
I don't know what happens when you don't save him.
It doesn't change too much. You still have the option at the end whether to preserve the Bastion or undo the calamity. And it really just boils down to, I think, right, Adrien, him being in one of the post end game credits.
Yeah. In some of the scenes. Right? Like
I didn't get to experience the Ura like nearly killing me but stopping out of respect, or the crossbow, the one that still tries to kill you, being killed by the general. Like I think that's a really neat touch to like that's why I regretted it, because I think that would have been a more fulfilling experience altogether.
Yeah, that was a pretty powerful moment, having just literally I finished the game less than 10 minutes before we started this recording, so that's very fresh in my mind of like, wow, that was actually a fairly powerful moment. of just like walking through that gauntlet of them, and they stop trying to kill you once you're, you're carrying Dolph, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite a moment.
Yeah, that was definitely really intense. And then on the other hand, if you don't save Zolf, you have to fight all those guys.
Yeah, you have to fight them. So honestly, where it seems like it'd be harder to save Zolf and not be able to attack back. It ultimately ends up being the easiest way to resolve that situation. That's but yeah, having to fight them so if we could talk about the combat, actually. I was not the hugest fan of the combat for this one.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I played on the whatever the sort of easy mode is that allows you to just continue if you go down. And I don't regret it.
Yeah.
Like the combat is fine, I guess, but it's not so tight or controlled, and you don't have the same the sense that you can so easily handle the fights in a way that feels good. And if you mess up, or if you die, it's because you screwed up rather than because the game kind of messed you over. I didn't get that feeling, so I definitely don't regret putting it on that mode.
Yeah, I agree. The combat is a little bit unrefined. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it, but it definitely could be tedious at times, and it could be pretty difficult to avoid damage. I don't think I played it on easy mode, but I got myself a build fairly early on that would make the game fairly easy. I think it was there's one that gives you 1 continue per level or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Just because it's pretty easy to randomly die.
Yeah, that's the one that I went with, but I kind of wish I could have had more continues, because there were several parts where I'm like, this is okay, if I'm inching along, which is maybe the way the game is designed to be played, then I can make it through, but it's also not very fun that way.
Yeah.
I feel like it's at its most fun when you can really throw yourself into the mix and but not get totally beaten down just for trying.
Yeah, I'd say that the game is at its most fun when it's a brawler. It's just the brawling controls aren't really tight enough to make that a super viable option unless you're very good at the game.
Yeah, you don't have a whole lot of crowd control ability.
Yeah, I kept for my special ability, I kept that shrapnel rain one pretty much through the end for that exact reason. This is if I ever needed to actually give myself a little bit of breathing room, that was my only recourse. I didn't really use melee weapons after I unlocked more than one ranged weapon. I don't know what kind of loadouts were you guys working with?
So I ran the sail hammer pretty much the entire game, and then I swapped out the second weapon between the bow at first. I spent a long time using the rifle, and then obviously at the end you get the calamity cannon, and so use that for the last couple levels.
Yeah, I did something pretty similar, although I did experiment with using the brusher's pike instead of the kale hammer at points. It can be helpful, having some extra reach on your melee attacks, but ultimately lacking that big arc swing of the hammer, especially when that was most of your crowd control for most of the game. It was relevant in a few levels, the one where there's that giant thing that keeps busting out of the grass.
The ankle gator.
Yeah, the ankle gator. Having the pike there, because it's there's really just one target that you need to attack, and it's really dangerous. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like the initial loadout that you're given with the breaker's bow and the kale hammer can take you through the entire game pretty easily.
By the way, I think it's the sail hammer because it's based on the name of Caelandia, which is the same way, because for some reason they decided to spell Caelandia Cael. Okay.
So I couldn't do the melee weapons. I think the perspective was still kind of new to me. So I would having to get that close was not comfortable. Like, so even the hammer, like between the hammer and the blades, like the hammer for sure, like the blades were quicker, but their range was even shorter. And they didn't do as much damage. So I could manage with the hammer, but once I had the shrapnel gun and the pistol, like that was all she wrote. I was like maining those two. And then I think at some point you get the rifle. The rifle was a good, I switched out of the pistol briefly for the rifle and eventually went to the mortar. And then the mortar carried me until we had the calamity cannon. And then I pretty much just kept the calamity cannon and the shrapnel musket.
Yeah, the shrapnel musket was quite good. And the calamity cannon, of course, is just the calamity cannon. That's all she wrote.
You kind of really can't do the last part without the, I mean, you can. Again, it supports you no matter how you want to play.
Yeah.
But like, I prefer those big damage ranged attacks. I don't care if I have to charge up and maybe take a hit or two.
Yeah, I tried using the mortar, but it was pretty, just, it was so slow.
Yeah. And also, like, just the fact that you can't like move at all while you're firing it, whereas you can with the rifle, which does also a lot of damage, but you know, only to a single target.
Yeah,
I just liked that with the rifle, once you upgraded it a couple times and you were hitting more shots, you could one shot a lot of enemies. Like a lot of the things you're fighting, you could just kill in one hit if you got that off.
The same with the mortar, though. I mean, you did take some damage, but like if you like, there are times where you could like plan it, like between enemy attacks, get close enough to where you didn't have to hold it for as long. But there were other times where you could see the enemy before they could see you, and there could be like a whole cluster of them. And it's just great to just demolish them all in one go. It's a very satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I kept the shrapnel cannon too, is because you just stand at that right range and you could be hitting all of them at once. Even if it takes more hits to kill them.
Do you guys feel like the number of weapons is reasonable for the length of the game?
I'd say that there is probably more weapon like choices than the game really needs, considering
That's kind of how I felt too.
Yeah.
Like I got to the end of the game and I was like, oh yeah, there were like 4 or 5 weapons that I used the one level that I got it, and then I was like, and tossed it out. And like, or if I wanted to, you know, when there were periods when I was finding new weapons that I wanted to use, it was like, oh, you know, I kind of enjoyed that other weapon that I had been using, but I like this new one better, but I only used the other one for like 1 level.
Yeah.
Until I found something better.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense to have that many weapon options and have you still unlocking them as late in the game as you are. Like if it were a matter of like, here's all the choices you have to work with within the first couple of levels, now figure out what loadout you want and go through the game, that'd be one thing. But like I also didn't like being forced to use a certain weapon throughout the level that you get it in until you maybe find an armory, and because it always replaces like the left face button.
Yeah.
Whatever weapon you had equipped to there, and sometimes that was like the one that I wanted to be using the rest of the level.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of that's some like game design sleight of hand where you force a player to do something so that they get some like familiarity with it, where you're like, oh, here's this weapon, you have to use it. Just so that players don't like drop all new options on the floor immediately. But
yeah,
that's what you often ended up doing if you didn't care for the weapon.
I don't know if we needed the bow and arrow plus the fang launcher.
Yeah, it was a little weird that you got them so close.
Well, and also I feel like the bow and the rifle are so similar as well.
That's true. Although can the rifle do the bow has the option of shooting like multiple, like it ricochets?
No, I don't think it does. So it's like, I mean, it is functionally a little bit different, but like not that much.
This is like these minor changes. Like if they had been more different, it would have been better. But I think, yeah, if you could have access to them from the very beginning, it'd be different. Just let you decide how you want to play through the whole game. Or if it had more of like a roguelike structure.
Actually, do you get, I haven't had a chance to check, but do you get all of the guns or all of the weapons if you play New Game Plus?
I don't know. I haven't played New Game Plus yet.
Because there is a New Game Plus mode. So I don't know, maybe it's there. I should have checked.
And that's cool, but like that's sort of like a cool feature from New Game Plus that should have just been in the main game. Whereas like you could have a really
Well,
a really
I don't know,
solid.
because I think there is a reason that Adrian was sort of alluding to with the way that it forces you to use a new weapon when you get it, is that they want to teach you how to use it, and usually you get a new weapon when there isn't a specific like situation in that level that weapon was designed to deal with.
Right, exactly.
That's true.
So it's kind of like here's a new weapon and we're going to teach you how to use it without saying like here's a tutorial,
Right.
you know. Like that's a very good approach to teaching your player how to use new mechanics within the game without being like really ham-fisted and obvious about it.
Okay, so then to invert the original question, do you think that the game is too short for the amount of weapons that it has?
So I think, since we're talking a lot about the game's pacing, I think the game aspires to have like a somewhat short like story mode, and then it aspires to have like all this side content and replayability. And I think that's why it has so much depth in its combat options. But if you're just playing it straight through, like, yes, there's like way more content that you need. That's why it has all of these like challenge things that you can do and all this stuff. They really intended for you to play the game a lot.
Yeah, and I would have done those if the mechanics were more fun.
Yeah.
I didn't, as it stands, I didn't do a single thing that wasn't main story.
Yeah.
Except for, I don't know if you have to do the backstory for Kid when you puff on the pipe.
I don't know if you have to, but I did do both that one and the eating the food when Zia cooks in the pot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I did the eating the food. That doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah, there's like next to the hookah is a pot. Once you find it and you give it to Zia, and then she'll cook some food in it, and you can go and do another one of those same sequences. I don't know if maybe there's a third one that you do with Rux, but maybe with the gramophone. But I just never like figured out how to unlock that. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I didn't even know. So yeah, I guess there is more stuff to it.
Yeah, I think there I think there may be a dream sequence for every character.
But those things are very, very difficult, and I would not have bothered to try to get through the whole thing if I hadn't had the like continue mode on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first one was enough for me. Or I don't know if the first, but the pipe one, that was enough for me.
I think it's the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, I just looked it up. There are 4 dream sequences.
4.
Oh, dang! I missed 2 of them then.
Yeah, I missed 3. But the first, the one that I did was enough for me. That gauntlet, I think it took me like 4 or 5 tries,
and
I was abusing the Skyway launch pads.
Yeah, they're definitely very tricky levels.
What other mechanic, like, so gameplay included, but in what ways do you guys think the game tells its story through the gameplay, or the combat included? What ways do you think the story tells its gameplay story through the gameplay? Wow, that took me a lot of tries.
I mean, I think the story really is all just mostly Rux narrating, which I love. I love listening to that story, and his voice is just so fun to listen to and like hear him talking about it. And then as you go through this story, you're like, this guy is not really a good guy. Like he's really not.
He's kind of there.
Well, no, but like he's also, I mean, he's the designer of the Bastion, but it seems like, he was probably also in some way related to the actual like calamity even happening in the first place.
Yep.
Doesn't seem, he's clearly not a fan of the Ura.
Yep.
So like
He does not talk favorably about them.
No, and like he doesn't really seem to be that concerned or bothered by the fact that Celandia was trying to just straight up wipe out the Ura.
Yeah.
He's just sort of like, well, we're trying to undo it at least. It's like you can't really undo that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sorry, that gets away from the question a little bit.
No, I think it's good.
I think that the gameplay it does have obviously some connection to it in that your experience cell, but but like the story really does exist in the narration, and in some of the like in the still images that you get of the characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the gameplay itself, there are a few points where, the gameplay does serve to tell the story, like how the world like constructs itself in front of you as you're, walking through it. That really gives you this feeling of like, wow, this place really is like destroyed to the point that like even the ground doesn't really hear, or that moment that we talked about when you like when you're walking out and everybody stops attacking you. That's also like, a kind of a gameplay moment where it's like, oh, that's cool. They're not fighting me. But apart from that, I feel like a lot of the minute-to-minute gameplay is just kind of standard brawler stuff. A lot of the enemies don't really seem to have a whole lot to do with the story.
Yeah,
I feel like these kind of wacky designs.
Yeah, and I feel like I think a lot of the time it really is more about the narration giving flavor to the thing that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like the narration tells you why you should care about what you're doing, and it's great, and it definitely succeeds at that. But that relationship doesn't really run in the opposite direction very often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of world building, like there was one enemy I really enjoyed fighting. We talked about it a little earlier, the Ankle Gator.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that both their inclusion in the lore and her inclusion in the lore, because I think that was the queen, right, or the mother, the last one or whatever. But their inclusion in the lore as a species, as well as just the way they feel the fight, like that was my most favorite boss, or encounter in general. But even though you have that creature and other creatures that are kind of like, oh, what's up with that? You never really find out too much about them without having to poke around. And the nature of the world kind of being all crumbly, while being cool for selling the concept of the calamity, also makes it hard for us, the player, I think, to get a sense for how the world is really built, how all of these things function together, because you only find them functioning apart.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
We also just don't really even have any real understanding of what Ceylondia itself was like.
Yeah.
We get a better idea of what the Ura, place is like, because we actually spend some time in it, and it's mostly, a little bit more there because they have the like whatever anchor things. But Ceylondia, we see less of Ceylondia than any other environment in the game.
Yeah, the only thing I know about Ceylondia comes from that one flashback that I did play. That was basically just all about the wall, which I imagine is to keep the Ura out. I didn't really pick up on what the wall was for.
But
but just based off of like the sort of bigotry we see with Russ and like the attitudes of that, like, which I do want to talk about in a bit, just like what Russ and the story represents about,
it's Rux, by the way.
Rux. I keep saying Russ.
Yeah.
What Rux kind of and represents about like general attitudes in the story, or from Ceylondia at least. But yeah, for now, it just suffice to say, like, you don't really know much about Ceylondia. Which I wonder, could there have been any kind of an intent behind that? Like, do you think that there is some kind of a message there about like knowing more about the people you're like kind of defining oneself based off of your disdain for something or some group?
Not really, because we don't really know that much about the Ura either.
We just know that they don't like each other.
Yeah, like that's the main thing, is that, oh yeah, these two groups don't like each other. They fought a war. There's peace now. And then everything went to hell with the cataclysm.
Yeah, I want to say that there's more behind that, although I think you learn a bit more about it in some of the dream sequences.
Probably.
So basically kind of missed out on a lot by not playing those dream sequences.
And we know that Zia is like, she was brought into Ceylondia after the war with her dad, but they were not allowed to leave the city because they were Ura, and Ura brought into Caelondia were never allowed to leave. Basically to try to like, I guess, control them, but like, man, yeah, it really does not paint Caelondia in a positive light. And then there's like the whole thing with like, what are they called? Not the Magisters, but the
Inquisitors.
No, it's like the group that's like that sort of ruled, that Zia's father worked for them, and it was basically the group that created the project that triggered the whole thing.
I know that the name of the researcher's name started with Z, the one that made the discovery that made the Calamity and the Bastion possible. I think Rux took that discovery and kind of did the inventing with it. There's a lot of it. And here's another thing, because a lot of that narration happens while I'm trying to focus on this kind of, to be honest, clunky combat, I end up missing a lot of it.
Or not remembering the details in the same way that you would otherwise.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm like, wait, what did he say?
Yeah.
He's got a great voice, but it's because it's so like kind of low and gravelly, it gets hidden really well behind like the sounds of combat, to the point where I had to turn down some of the other sound design just to hear him, which is fine because like that's kind of an unavoidable, in a way unavoidable, unless you want to really tinker with the default sound design settings.
Yeah.
But yeah, Rux is like, his disdain for the Ura is so obvious, and then he's so willing to let Zulfa be like Zulfia be represented of like all Ura. Like, and then you get there, and if you decide to save Zulfia, if you're the bigger man than I was, then what you get to see is them like no, they're not. They don't like Zulfia. They're beating him down because they don't like what he did to the Bastion either. He's like, yeah, they were trying to fix it. Yeah, we don't forgive them, but we don't want this not fixed.
Yeah, the story definitely is very ambiguous. It doesn't really give you enough information to go on. In that kind of way, it reminds me a bit of Dark Souls, in that, you only have pieces, but you have even less to go on than Dark Souls.
Because it's a small indie title, which is fine, but like I feel like there's like a whole, like I almost feel like in the classic NES days where you had to read the story in the booklet, only there's no booklet.
Right. Let's see, we were kind of talking about the relations between the Ura and the Caledonians, Caelondians, that's
Caelondia.
Right. Caelondians. Yeah,
they put so much effort into these like little details for the world building, but yeah, again, like just like the exact relationship between them, other than they don't like each other, we don't know a whole bunch. We know like little snippets. We know that there's some wall involved, that the kid worked there, but just like with seeing the Calamity and how it's torn the physical world apart, we don't understand anything about like the workings of the world around it. Moving into Transistor, they started to fix this problem, I think, a little bit. Not only do you have like an actual world that isn't putting itself together as you try to explore it, but you get a sense for who the characters are, where they come from, and how the world around you is working, even if you're not exactly diving deep into it. Like it's better because you don't learn as many little details as you do in Bastion, but you get the big picture.
Yeah, I agree. Bastion has a whole bunch of just like small call outs. I imagine there's a big old world building document that the guys at Supergiant put together that explains a lot of this, but they only put little feelers into it, those details that you talked about, and there just isn't enough information to really understand the societies, apart from basically trivia about them.
Yeah, and honestly, I could do away with the trivia, because like the truth is I don't really care about these things, because I don't know anything else about the world.
And I think some of it's also just like, honestly, a lot of it feels very tropey, you know, like, oh, there's a city that's at war with the underground people and they don't like each other. There's like, basically discrimination between the two, and the city was trying to screw things over even more, and so then they made a weapon and it backfired. Like, the broad strokes of the game and the story are actually not that compelling or, like, I don't know, new in my opinion. I feel like that's a lot, but like that's also, most stories have already been told. It's just because it's so bare bones, you don't get a lot more of the color that makes it interesting.
Right. There's no flavor to kind of hide the fact that you're eating boiled chicken again. You didn't put any salt and rosemary on there.
But it comes along with a really great service by the waiter, and and like they have a really great live band in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, you don't really go for the food. You go there because the music's awesome. Like,
yeah.
They got this guy who comes up.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that it's, Bastion is very much presentation and execution. Rather than being more about like the fundamentals.
That being said, what is it? What are the things that really helped it, in your opinions, become the indie darling that it has? Like, how did
music and the narration?
You think it's just all about that, pretty much?
So I mean, I'd say music, narration, and kind of primacy. I think Bastion has a bit of a founder's effect where, it was one of those first, maybe you call it like a single A title rather than a triple A title or a double A title, where it's like, it was an indie game, but it had very high production values that you would expect from, it's sort of an auteur game almost, where it's made by a small company, but it's scoped properly that they can really polish it.
It does a lot of things. It does a lot of things that hadn't been done before that have been done better since.
Yes,
but it's like somebody had to be GoldenEye.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody had to show us how this, like what does and doesn't work and how to fix it. Like,
and that there's a market for a game like it. That's the other thing too. That like people would be willing to pay money for this kind of experience.
I would love to play like a 60-hour game set in that world, one that really fleshed it out. Like it doesn't even need to be like the same story. It could be like the sequel to the best ending or whatever, and then you get actually get to expand beyond the Ura and Zealandia and kind of see how it all works. Because I am very interested where ankle gaiters fit into it all.
But I think one of the things that I do like a lot about Bastion that I don't necessarily, I have found that I don't play that many single player games that are story based anymore. And one of the things that I do like about Bastion is that the combat, while it's not perfect, is approachable enough and easy enough that I feel like I could put it down for a little while and come back to it and still do okay. Which I feel is a problem with a lot of AAA single player games, is you put it down for The Witcher 3 was like this for me. I put it down for a while and I came back and I was like, how do I fight things? I don't remember. And it was just, stressful. So like that is one thing that I do like about Bastion, is that it's not too complex. Also, I do like the overall pretty linear sort of storytelling of it, where yes, you have these side quests and you have these side things that you're doing, but the main thread of the game is all just through that. There's the next shard or the next core that you need to go and get. And to me, at least, and I know that this is not true for everybody, right? I know that many people enjoy much more free-flowing, open world games, but I actually tend to find myself getting a little bit overwhelmed by it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is nice. It is refreshing to have a game that is just like, this is the story that we want you to experience. And at the very least, Bastion still has a level select screen. It's not like it's entirely linear. You can do plenty of stuff. But yeah, the story advances along a single thread.
I mean, I think there was once or twice where you could just they were like, oh, here's 2 shards, decide which one you want to go to first. But those weren't levels that really gave you big plot progression. If anything, that's like maybe you find Zia in one and then Zulf in another or something like that.
Right,
Yeah.
and you'll need to do both.
Yeah,
Right.
It doesn't change anything.
Yeah, and I think it's actually really important that the story was ultimately essentially linear, because they were able to do the narration the way that they were because it's linear, because they can depend on, okay, you will know Zia by this point in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And Rux can talk about her. If it was completely open, it probably you get this exponential problem where you need exponentially more content the larger your game scope, because you have just infinite intercombinations.
And then that means that players are not going to see a lot of the content that you put in the game.
Yep. And you end up with the Mass Effect problem.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I do appreciate, like, one other thing I really appreciate is the smaller cast for a game. Like I feel like it would have been so easy for them to be like, well, here's a bunch of zany characters that we actually want you to care about, and but the game is still only 8 to 10 hours long, depending on how you play it, if that.
Yeah.
Like,
I think I finished it in about 6, but that's partly because I was playing it on easier difficulty, so I basically never had to go back and redo a level.
I mostly played it on my breaks at work because I got it on Switch, which it is, like, again, that combat being so easy to pick up and remember makes it a good, like, Switch title, because it's really good for pick up and play for, like, I got like 15 minutes.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, even mid-level, like, if I didn't finish a level in a session, I'd be like, that's okay, I'll be able to pick it up. Whereas, like, other games, more involved games, like shit, what was I doing just now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, like, keeping things simple, I think, really is the lesson here. They limited their scope. The game is only 8 hours long, maybe on average. A lot of the stuff like weapons are fairly easy for some programmers to implement and don't require a shit ton of art. They really aim to make the game replayable by giving you a lot of options on how to play it, but still only delivering a fairly short experience.
Yeah, I think the combat is fun for a short game, but again, if I were to see that 60-hour game, I think I would either want a revamping of the current combat, or even just make it like a JRPG. I'd play a JRPG in this world.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah.
Especially with how many little details they have. Something like a JRPG lends itself very well to that.
Yeah, I would play that. Do you guys have a favorite character? There's not a lot to choose from,
right?
I mean, I like Rux is at the top of the list just because he is the narrator, and he tells you everything that happens in the game. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like the player character is kind of interesting as well, like a little bit interesting. Like, he is the player character is also a lot of those tropes again. He's kind of like oh yeah, this is the kid that goes off and does things better than anybody else, and then he volunteers for a second tour. No one's ever done that before. Like that whole thing. But yeah, like why is he here? We don't really know that.
I guess I think whatever skills made him so good and capable at the wall were the same, or the kind of skills that helped him survive and get to the Bastion. Because that whole first level is you wake up and the calamity's happening.
Yeah.
Right? And
or it's already kind of happened, actually.
Or yeah, but you somehow it hasn't affected you. Why hasn't it affected the kid yet?
Who knows?
Yeah. Because everyone else is like turning to stone, but no, some people haven't, like Zia, Zulf. Maybe you're just lucky.
It like seems like I was just double checking some stuff, and it seems like there is some level of like, oh, if you were protected in a certain way, you could survive, but it really doesn't go into details.
The people we wanted for the plot survived.
They made it, so that the movie can happen.
Yeah, it's plot armor. I mean, that's fair. That's a reasonable enough assumption, right? That like, in order for this whole thing to happen, there's a certain number of people who need to be there.
Yeah.
So none of us has played New Game Plus.
Right.
Would either of you go back and play New Game Plus?
Nah,
No, I don't think so.
And Adrien, when you played the second ending, did you go back and play through the whole game again, or did you just replay the level?
I just replayed the level.
Yeah. So do you think this game has replayability?
I think if you really enjoy the combat and you enjoy like the dream sequence challenges, this game could have some pretty serious replayability as you like experiment with different builds and stuff. But if the story is really what brings you, I'd say the game isn't particularly replayable. It might be something that you revisit every 5 or 10 years just to remind yourself of the game and like experience a slightly different playthrough. But
Yeah, I agree. Because like I started playing the game originally shortly after it came out in 2011, and didn't finish it. I didn't finish the game back then. I got to, I think, probably around where like 1 or 2 levels past when the Bastion gets damaged the first time.
mhm.
And you start gathering uh,
The shards.
the shards. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, but then I stopped at that point for some reason. I don't remember why, but I never picked it up again until we were like talking about recording this episode, and I was like, okay, sure, I'll play through it. It's not a super long game, and
Mhm.
actually, this was my first time finishing it. But it's been a decade since I actually played it last,
took a
and
decade to finish the 6-hour game.
and it was enjoyable to play through it. I'm happy I finished it and that I actually got to experience the whole thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm not likely to do it again for another 10 years.
Yeah.
That is one benefit of the podcast. I feel like there's a lot of games I wouldn't have finished if I wasn't incentivized by the fact that we were planning to do an episode.
Yeah.
Dark Souls was one of them, but but I was super glad, like even halfway to 2/3 of the way through the game, that I was being incentivized, because like there were so many points where I would have just straight quit, but I was
Mhm.
glad that I didn't, and that I had a reason not to. With this
Yeah.
one, I was sort of like, I'm glad that I didn't, so that we could have this conversation. But like if I wasn't doing a podcast and didn't have the opportunity to kind of like do something with it, I would have kind of I don't think I would have ever finished it, and I don't think I would have regretted it.
Mhm. I mean, I like I finished Bastion a few times just because it was mentioned so much in the circles that I was in at the time, among a bunch of people who are, interested in games and this new thing called indie games and this, new revolutionary thing, game Bastion that came out. So, I think a lot of my friends have fond memories of it. But, like a lot of old games, you come back to it, and when things push the boundaries, like there's going to be rough edges on them.
Yeah, and also now the boundaries are a little bit further than that game pushed
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
But like, man, it did feel good to like get to experience a couple of those songs actually in the
Yeah.
game, rather than, because I'd listened to the soundtrack. I used to listen to the soundtrack a lot because it's such a good soundtrack.
Mhm.
But I hadn't really seen some or heard some of those songs in their context, and I really enjoyed hearing that. So yeah, definitely worthwhile to play it again at this point. But
Yeah, even just to know, I think it will for a long time to come be a part of the discussion of video games. So even just to have that bit of history where it's like, yeah, maybe you won't like Shakespeare, but you should probably read a little bit of Shakespeare at some point. Like,
Yeah.
just to
and
know
I do
what
think
people.
that point about it being one of those main sort of foundational games of the indie game, movement almost in a way
Mhm.
within video gaming that is an incredibly important thing for it, because yeah, I mean, there were definitely other successful indie games by that point, but like this was another one of those early ones that was really important in bringing it to the mainstream and like getting more and more people interested in it, and willing to give things a try that weren't coming out of the big studios.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm glad that did. I'm glad they did. Like, and there's a lot of stuff, like even visually. Again, the world constructing itself, that's not really something we'd seen before, but I feel like I've seen it a couple of times since in different games that I can't necessarily name. Like I've seen it happen in like some 3D games,
Mhm.
and just stuff like that. Like it really there's a lot of imagination to that. And I think prior to indie games becoming such a huge thing, it was hard for any one person's imaginative idea to make it all the way through to the final product. And you look at a lot of AAA titles, I think they end up playing it safe the more popular that they get.
It's important to have the indie game scene in order to push those boundaries, because otherwise, I don't think it's a secret that AAA games have kind of been collapsing into one or two major genres that are kind of kitchen sink genres. And it's important to have somebody doing something else.
Mm-hmm. Or and, even go ahead.
That was kind of the end of my thought.
I was gonna say, and just to have indie games, because now indie games are going back and talking about concepts in games that they like those designers grew up with. Like we have Shovel Knight, which is basically like an old school Mega Man mixed with a couple of other concepts. Then those same Yacht Club, now they're coming up with a Nina the Hollower, which is sort of like an Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, Link's Awakening kind of recap or rehash of that kind of gameplay. And so that's cool. Like they're revisiting the indie scene. I'm glad for this game and others in its era for like really making indie games a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think one major thing is that you have all of these genres from older games that have kind of gotten pushed out because they're not like, they don't have like the best mass market appeal. And indie games are able to actually bring those back. We've had, you already mentioned like, bringing back old school Mega Man or bringing back old school Castlevania. You've got a lot of people who are, indie developers who are able to tap into some nostalgia or just desire for games that aren't, what's mainstream right now. And they're able to, because their costs are lower and because people still like it, they can make games for a smaller market segment. It also probably helps that they don't have corporate shareholders who want to see month over month growth.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's why Factorio can be a thing.
Right. Exactly.
They don't have people concerned with the overall brand of the company. Like the reason they don't take so many risks with Mario games anymore is like, especially the character Mario is now he's a brand icon. He can't change. He can't have development.
Right. And I mean, I'd even argue that something like Nintendo's games, at the very least, they haven't collapsed it completely into the AAA trap of making the same open world everything kitchen sink game with minion management and a crafting system and this and that.
A cooking mechanic.
Right. And I mean, even though I say that, I mean, we still have things like Breath of the Wild, which is some of this.
But it still has that Zelda charm.
Yeah. But and it's also not, and that's specifically Zelda, right? They don't have a Metroid one and a Mario one, and there's still distinct properties with their own approaches to gameplay.
Right. And I know this isn't Nintendo, but now we have Sonic Frontier coming, which have you heard anything about?
No, I haven't heard about that at all.
It's looking to be an open world Sonic.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. Maybe it'll be great, but I'm just like, are they falling into that trap where it's like everything has to be an open world now? This is the new way video games are done.
But to bring it back to Bastion, did you guys run into any glitches or bugs while you were playing? Because I had one.
Oh, tell us.
Pretty significant one. During that sequence where after you see Zulf, and he's like, I'm not going to stop you, my countrymen will. And you go back to the Bastion, it's under attack, and they have the whole weird rocks that have come through, and a bunch of Ura are there attacking your friends that you've made. I had a bugs on that scene twice. The first time I was unable to complete it because I couldn't find the last enemy.
Oh yeah, I think I ran into that as well.
Yeah, so like it was one of the Ura, and I presumably they did their like little zip thing to get out of, or like to move back from me, but they like zipped into some accidental, corner where I couldn't find them, couldn't hear them,
Yep, yep.
and I couldn't kill them. So I
Mhm.
couldn't finish it. And then the other one was when I restarted it, I eventually actually did get through it because the the other creatures, the creatures that I had gotten, like the ankle gator and stuff that you brought the eggs and they hatched. They killed the last Ura because for some reason my controller stopped working.
Huh.
Like all of a sudden, I just wasn't able to, and my keyboard stopped working, and I was able to like tab out of the game, but I wasn't able to interact with the game in any way.
So is the game crashing?
I mean,
Or
well, the
something.
weird thing, it seemed like it, but then when I finished that scene when like my allies killed the last Ura, the scene went on to the next one, and I was able to like basically unplug my controller again, and then at that point it started working again. So I don't know if that was maybe like a controller issue, but like my keyboard and mouse weren't being recognized by the game either. So it was super weird. But eventually I got through through it, and that was the only time that I actually ran into a bug. But it was a very weird one.
I didn't really run into any bugs. One funny thing that happened was there was just one jumping enemy that jumped off the ledge. But I thought that might have just been because I lured it to.
Was that in the quarry?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that same thing too. I killed that by having it jump off the side of the map on accident.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing was, it was literally as we first started the fight. So like the narrator Rux was still talking about that enemy, and then he just falls off, and I'm like kind of like,
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Like Rux is like describing how this guy is, this thing is very dangerous, and they were never able to beat it over, multiple attempts, and lost so many men to it, and it just jumps off the edge of the map. I'm like, okay.
I guess no one ever thought to just like sit and watch it for a while.
Well, I mean, they had round before,
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, Calamity. Did you experience any glitches, Adrien?
I think I ran into some of those like event-based bugs where that caused some problems. And also there's a few minor bugs, like sometimes Rux will like interrupt himself even though he's not supposed to. And I think I've run into like some minor clipping and things like that, but for a game that was put together, I think by 2 programmers, it's not doing too badly.
No, it's pretty good.
No.
Again, with that it's so important to remember that context. With all of our complaints, it's like I don't think like, especially like I can't imagine doing any better. Like
yeah,
I don't have any kind of computer knowledge though, so I'm not the best example, but this is sort of like by the grace of having played a lot of games, I can be like, well, I know that this can be better because I've seen it done better, but it's like, yeah, but I don't know how to do it better. So
yeah, as a amateur game dev myself, I can tell you that what they accomplished was very, very impressive for just like 2 programmers, like I think 1 or 2 artists. I mean, it was an incredibly small team.
And at a time when the development tools were not as sophisticated as they are now.
Yeah, so Bastion was actually done in something called XNA, which is near and dear to my heart because it's how I initially learned how to make games. But it was a product put out by Microsoft that allowed indie devs basically to put games on the Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
It's since unfortunately ceased support, and I don't know how they even got it onto the Switch. There may have been some pretty serious porting efforts there, but it's not a game engine, so they really did have to build a lot of stuff from scratch. It's not quite the same as like having to build everything on top of like DirectX, which is an absolute nightmare, I might add. But it's definitely pretty bare bones.
That's good to know. Like, I mean, it's always impressive just when small groups of people finish a game together, like, and are able to realize their vision. And I want to applaud them for that, because I'm sure it took a lot of work. And I mean, any documentary I've ever seen about small and game development teams, it's like you sacrifice so much sleep, and and that's if you want to get it done in a timely manner. I mean, there's other games like Cave Story that was made over the course of 10 years by one guy, and it's like, I bet even though he didn't, like, I bet he was still working on it like all the time. Like, so yeah, like, good. What do you know their names?
Actually, I've got the Wikipedia article up here. Programmer is Gavin Simon, Andrew Wang. The designer was Amir Rao. The artist was Jen Z. The writer was Greg Gassavin. The composer was Aaron Cobb. And yeah.
All right, so all of those people, if you're listening, and we have no reason to think that you're not, thank you for making this game, and good job, and thank you for making it through all of our complaints, because it's been 10 years since this game came out, and I know that that you've improved since then, and that we know that you've improved since then.
The stuff that I've heard about Hades is that it is an incredible game.
Yes,
I might be checking that one out next. I'm not thrown, and I've already played Transistor, and I think that it was already way better. So yeah,
I mean, this was their first game.
Yeah, the first game ever. Like, damn, I would be making.
This was the first game for Super Giant Games. Like, they had not made anything before this.
Yeah,
and they just
at least as a single company, right?
Maybe on their own, but like all together. Oh, that's really cool, and they really found their niche right away. In a way, like, and expanded upon that, which is really cool.
Yeah, I'm especially happy to see Hades have a much better reception compared to Transistor, whose reception was kind of muted.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I feel like I remember there was a lot of hype for Transistor because Bastion was so well received, and then actually Transistor wasn't that popular.
Yeah.
Do you guys think? What do you guys think are the core themes of Bastion?
I feel like a lot of it is around like prejudice, and like that the whole story of just like that, the tension between those two races. Like, I feel like that's a pretty big one, and like the fact that there was just so much intolerance on both sides, and there just wasn't a good guy.
Yeah, I'd say another pretty major theme is moving on after loss.
Yeah.
The entire story is really presented as just like this grand tragedy of people trying to pick up the pieces.
And then they have to do it like twice more. Because the Bastion falls apart, it gets attacked again, and then all this like, and then the kid, his whole back, like even before the calamity, like his mom dying, and then the only reason he was doing those tours on the wall was that she could have money to buy food.
Yep.
But she wasn't even getting that money.
No, yeah, it's all totally fucked up. And I agree. Like, I think there is something to be said about the fact that sometimes the kind of prejudice that we see in the game is systemic to a degree where maybe nobody knows anymore why it all started. Like, it's just we hate them because that's what we do. Yeah. And both sides are doing that, and they've hated them for so long that there's a wall.
Yeah.
So I guess that's cool. And I guess for something so short, it doesn't need to be more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to see. It would have been nice to see.
You know what is interesting though? How many Ceylandian characters do you see in the game? It's just you, your player character, and Rux.
Yeah, that's true. And the other two are Yura.
And you see a lot more Yura as well.
Yeah, because they didn't get killed.
Right. Yes.
Hang on, I'm getting a lot of static. Okay, it's down. Sorry, I was getting a lot of static. What were you saying, Sami?
Oh, just that you were actually like lagging a bit.
Oh, okay, that's good. Yeah. How about you, Adrian?
Any other thoughts about the characters?
Or the themes?
I think really there, maybe not theme, but on the tone. Just the game is incredibly melancholy. Just everything that happens is in this kind of melancholy tone, and really the only time that you get anything that isn't that is if you decide to just take the Bastion and not reset the world. That's the only time that the game's tone shifts to something a little bit happier. I think you can extract a little bit of a message there that like dwelling on trying to fix the past isn't really a path to happiness.
Or that like, yeah, like you try to rebuild that world, and what do you get out of it? The same shitty world.
Yeah, exactly. There's one thing that pointed out that like Zia, if you do reset the world, is shown still unhappy. Like the happiest points of her life have been after the calamity, not before it. And
yeah, she does say that specifically.
Yeah, and it's probably the same for the kid.
And you're like, again, what are you really saving anyway?
Yeah.
Which did you choose?
A world that's fucked up beyond imagination.
Which did you use? Which did you choose, Sami?
I reset the world because here's the thing. The whole thing about it is that yes, you have like this is a post-apocalyptic thing, right? And like the people who are still here are Zia clearly is happy about it, like prefers to be there. But there's also presumably hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people who died in the calamity. And so why is the happiness of one or two survivors more important than the existence and survival of an entire society and like all those people? And yes, like it was clearly an unjust society, and there were really deep problems, and we don't know whether or not they would set off a cataclysm again. That could happen, but it was hard for me to imagine a place where letting things continue basically and keeping the Bastion in the post cataclysm world was a better world than one in which the cataclysm hadn't happened.
Yeah, I do think that if while I mentioned what I thought the game's ethics were and its message about loss, I do agree that I don't think completely obliterating the lives of probably millions of people can be seen as anything other than something that needs to be averted.
That's fair. I feel like as I get older and older, I see that point more. But it's also sort of like I could also see how tempting it is to just like live out your life in a small paradise with a handful of friends.
Plus, I think there's also the fact that you've now just spent the 6 to 8 to 10 hours listening to Rux, interacting with the and these characters, right? These are the ones that you've been sort of shown, and so you might care about them more than you care about the ideals, right? So I can get why somebody would make the other decision to not I totally understand. It's just I think there's a
Could you imagine though being stuck as one of the last 4 people in the universe, and one of them is like this racist old dude?
No, I can't
who's racist
that,
towards
actually.
like the other 2 people that you're hanging out with.
And one of those other 2 people you had to save after he tried to get you killed.
Yeah. And he just like won't let it go.
Yeah.
He gets drunk all the time and like, hey, Zolf, remember that time he tried to because there's only so many things you could talk about, right?
Oh boy. Getting spicy.
Yeah, that could have turned out to be hell instead of heaven.
Yeah.
All right. But Zia's happy, and that's all I want. Like,
yeah, make the pretty girl happy.
yeah. She's got her own harem.
Yeah, that's definitely the like moral and ethical choice.
Make the pretty girl happy. I just want to see you smile.
All right,
All
are we
right.
ready to wrap this up?
I think so. I think we've gotten a good chunk in there, and this was a really good time. I'm glad to be doing this again with you guys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening again. I know we were on a hiatus for a while, but I really appreciate it. Thanks to Sami, thanks to Adrien for being on. Thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you for the aforementioned designers, creators, programmers who made this game possible and put your dream out into the world. That's just a really cool thing. We'll be back again soon with a new game to talk about. But till next time, everybody, stay nerdy. But it's like somebody had to be GoldenEye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.